Pretty much anything you want to do with reporting services can be done using the web service endpoints. Now, there are a few common tasks that you can accomplish using these endpoints. You can do things like get a list of reports that are available on a particular report server in a single folder, in all folders across the web server, a lot of flexible options for getting that list of reports. You can also get a list of accounts that are authorized for a report. So in your custom application, you can do things like check to make sure that the user who is logged into your application or is logged into Windows where the application is running is authorized to perform various actions. You can also get a list of rendering methods that are supported by reporting services. You can customize that, and your application can see what this particular report service is able to do. You can create various objects, including a subscription to a report, or even a report from scratch. If you generate the RDL, the report definition language within your application, making sure that it's proper XML and all that, then you can create a report from that from your application and store it on the report server. And then you can create a subscription to it and various other objects as well. And then you can also do things like manage user authorizations. And there are plenty of other uses for the service. Like I said, virtually anything a custom tool can do, a Microsoft provided tool can do, you can do in your custom applications using the web services, assuming that the user running the application has the proper permissions to perform those actions. And you can even use it for more mundane tasks like executing reports. Now, the report server web service is made up of two web services, or what are called endpoints. The first one is the management endpoint. You use this endpoint to manage a reporting services server and its reports, folders, data sources, whatever. And really, this is probably the endpoint that you're going to use most often. And in order to access that, use this URL, HTTP, hostname, whatever the host is, localhost, or some machine you can access over the internet or local network, report server, or the name that you define within Reporting Services Configuration Manager for that instance of reporting services, and then report service 2010.asmx. So that's the actual name of the endpoint. And then the second web service is the execution endpoint. And you use this endpoint in order to execute a reporting services report. And the form of that URL is pretty similar to the previous one, except you use report execution 2005 ASMX. To emphasize, the management endpoint is report service 2010, and the execution endpoint is report execution 2005. Now, much as it looks like they might be, those are not typos. The management endpoint uses the 2010 year, and the execution endpoint uses 2005. Now, I suspect that what Microsoft did when it first started out and produced reporting services as a product is that they had the intention of updating the name with each new version of SQL Server. And in fact, the very first version of reporting services for use with SQL Server 2000, oh so long ago, used the endpoint names reportservice.asmx and reportexecution.asmx. No years on them. And then in SQL Server 2012, the management endpoint was changed to 2010, while the execution endpoint stayed at 2005. And in fact, back in SQL Server 2005 timeframe, they were both 2005. So why the inconsistent pushing forward of the years on the naming and so forth? Well, frankly, I really have no idea. I'm sure Microsoft had some very good reasons for this, but they really do seem to be locked away in the collective memory of Microsoft. So just consider it an interesting quirk of the evolution of the reporting services product. Okay, so all of this naming kind of confusion leads to some interesting quirks in accessing these web services. Somewhat surprisingly, endpoints with the years of later versions of SQL Server than 2005 don't throw an error if you attempt to view the web service in a browser. So, for example, you might come in here and attempt to use a URL that looks like this. So the host name, I'll change this to localhost. And report server, that's the correct name of my reporting services instance there. And then report service 2014. Latest version as I record this is SQL Server 2014. Seems like a logical number to use. So I'll go ahead and enter that. And interestingly enough, what I don't get is access to the web service. Instead, once reporting services wakes up, I get this listing of the virtual directory. Okay, so useful, I suppose, from within a browser, because I can browse around into sample reports and see the reports and do all that kind of good stuff that I can do from this URL. But it's not a web service. If I attempted to connect to this URL and treating it as a web service within my application, I'm not going to get anything useful whatsoever. Okay, so I might try it also with 2012. As you can see, I get the same thing. In fact, ironically enough, it is accessing the same instance of reporting services. On this local machine, I only have a single instance of reporting services installed. It's the same one. Okay, now I can come back here and try 10. And now I get the WSDL for that web service. Now, WSDL is the Web Services Definition Language. You can see the acronym right there. And this has all of the metadata for all of the features of this web service. So this is the management web service. So this defines a lot of different object types as well as methods, few properties and so forth that you can use and access as part of your application. Now, in the earlier days of web services, when SOAP was a new term, the Simple Object Access Protocol, you had to do a lot of this XML yourself. But now, with all the advanced tools, particularly the tools in reporting services and Visual Studio and numerous other kinds of applications, all of this is hidden behind the scenes. You don't have to worry about this if you don't care about it. But if you're interested in how the web service is structured, you can scroll through this, and it'd probably be more useful to look at it using some sort of XML editor that you can explore the hierarchy of the XML rather than just scroll through it like this. But you can see all kinds of information about how reporting services exposes its features through this web service. Okay, so this is the proper URL to use for accessing the web service. Now, continuing the interesting exploration, if I put in something like 2009, which was never a version, once again I get that virtual directory. So you can get the sense that anytime reporting services doesn't know what to do with that web service, it doesn't match up with an endpoint, it just gives me a listing of the virtual directory. Okay? But if I go in here and select 2005, which was a valid year, once again I get the WSDL for the 2005 version of this service. Okay? So actually through the SQL Server 2008, 2008 R2, and so forth, through those versions of reporting services, you had to use 2005. Okay? But now it's 2010. They updated it with SQL Server 2012, and then kept the same year in SQL Server 2014. Okay? So don't worry too much about this. Just know that you want to use 2010 for the management service, and you want to use 2005 for the report execution service. So if you just remember that, you'll be in good shape. But I think it's kind of interesting to know this kind of quirky history of how reporting services and the web services has developed over the years.